Is this the best puncher in MMA history? Becoming a UFC champion is essentially the goal of any mixed martial artist. So when a fighter becomes a 2-time UFC champion in 2 weight classes and in a little over 10 fights during their entire mixed martial arts career, it's an incredible and almost unbelievable feat. Alex Pereira's rapid ascendancy in mixed martial arts may have had a little help due to his history in kickboxing with then middleweight champion Israel Adesanya, with Alex being the only man to knock out the Nigerian-born, New Zealand-based fighter, but the rest has been down to the hands of stone of Pereira. He has cemented himself as one of the most devastating strikers in not only the modern era, but in the entire history of the sport. So what is it about Alex that makes him such an incredible puncher? In this video, we're going to take a closer look. Experience is to have acquired skill or knowledge because you have done something many times. It is fair to say that Alex has had his fair share of experience when it comes to striking, becoming a 2-time Glory Kickboxing World Champion. As much as kickboxing is a completely different sport to MMA, there is a crossover, and the experience Alex has in striking pays dividends in his ability to perform under pressure. He has already reached the pinnacle of a sport. Every fight in mixed martial arts starts on the feet, and Alex has somewhat of an advantage over many other fighters, particularly those looking to strike. Alex has thousands of repetitions in the bank, not only in training, but in live competition. His left hook, for example, is very well rehearsed. Alex would have tried and tested his game many times under the pressure of competition. There have been moments of adversity throughout his career, like when Israel Adesanya had him out on his feet during their kickboxing rematch in Brazil. Alex was not only able to weather the storm, but come back from the brink of defeat to win decisively. This gives Alex the evidence in which he can trust. He has been in the fire and he can handle the heat. It is not only a case of technical proficiency, but also mental fortitude. Any opponent he faces in mixed martial arts that doesn't have a storied career in any other combat sport is already at a distinct disadvantage. Alex has experience. This is something that cannot be overlooked when looking at the how and the why of Alex's success in the UFC. It is part of how he is capable to step up on such late notice with a lack of preparation and still deliver. Experienced and proficient strikers make one sequence lead onto the next. Exchanges aren't random. If a fighter defends an attack in a certain way, it's taken note of and will have an effect on how the next exchange plays out. This means traps can be set. Experience allows a fighter to make these reads quickly and build on an opponent's reactions. Take Alex versus Sean Strickland. Alex flattened Sean with a picture-perfect left hook, but Alex had laid the foundations in the sequences prior. He'd been jabbing to the head and body of Sean to gauge his defence, making sure to stand that outside and be careful of his foot position before eventually feinting the jab and turning it into a left hook, which sparked Sean. Sean's tendency to overreact to the straight punches and reach out, leaving his chin exposed, cost him dearly against Pereira. When watching Pereira strike, it is difficult to notice a clear pattern as he doesn't really punch from a conventional athletic position. Going back to the Strickland knockout, it shows how difficult it was for Sean to see the left hook coming, as the starting point for the left hook is the same as a Pereira straight punch. A good basic athletic position is characterised by a stance that is shoulder width apart, the knees are slightly bent, the feet are parallel or slightly turned outwards, and the shoulders are above the knees. This position requires stability and strength from the hips and deep core. When an athlete is looking to change direction quickly, move something, or strike something with force, they will need to adopt this athletic position to be more efficient. This is why we will see athletes train fundamental movement patterns to improve their overall athletic performance. Things such as compound lifting combined with speed and agility drills. When we see a boxer like Triple G punch, we can see where the power comes from, as he's doing all of the aforementioned. He's bent at the knees, sitting his centre of gravity low, bracing the core and fully rotating the torso. The power makes sense. When we look at Pereira, He doesn't seem to deliver his best work from a position that is conducive to producing these jaw-dropping knockouts. Again, this is not to say Pereira doesn't punch with great technique, it's more that he's very good at disguising his intentions. Let's take a look at these two Pereira knockouts for an example. One in kickboxing and one in mixed martial arts, both of them with the left hook. In this first example against Thomas Powell, Pereira completes the punch in a textbook boxer's position for a left hook. He's fully rotated, pivoted on the lead foot, elbow in line with the wrist, and he has a fairly wide stance. It is pretty much out the book, and how most boxing coaches are going to teach a student to punch. Where it gets interesting is his starting point. Pereira is stood tall, almost straight-legged, and his left hand is low. His shoulders are almost square, meaning he doesn't have much of a load up for the left side, and his left foot is pointing slightly in. It isn't a position a fighter is usually taught to punch from, and it doesn't look particularly threatening. The opponent can't really tell Pereira's intent, and this is key. The timing and the technique of the punch when it's thrown is everything. The setup for this hook was off of a right high kick. As Pereira's foot lands, he lowers his left hand, which signals to the opponent he is about to throw the left hook. The opponent shields his face with his arm, a classic answer the phone defense for the hook, but nothing happens. Pereira doesn't punch. At this moment, Pereira begins to wind up, and Powell didn't feel an impact and thinks he's good to go, so begins his step in to throw his own attack. And there we have it, the car crash. Pereira beats Powell to the punch and ices him. That's part of the secret to his one-punch knockout ability. His timing is offbeat and difficult to read. He didn't kick directly into the punch, there was a slight pause between and Powell didn't read it. He thought he was safe and he did not see the punch coming. In the second example against Adesanya, we see a similar pattern emerge. Pereira has just overwhelmed Adesanya with a barrage of punches. He's hurt and takes a count to recover. The two men look to exchange on the restart. Pereira gallops in and throws a knee. A little clunky. The two men tie up and then look to exchange punches on the break. Both appear to miss. Adesanya throws a cross and Pereira slips, turning the cheek and then fires back with a left hook as Adesanya throws a jab from completely out of position. This was another left hook where Pereira didn't appear to be in a great place to be able to punch with power. He stood fairly tall and his hands aren't where they should be, but he's able to bring his arm all the way down to his waist to generate momentum and swing into a hook, albeit inches away from his opponent. Pereira finishes the punch as always, left foot pivoted, shoulder turned through, elbow following in line with the wrist. Adesanya, much like Powell, simply didn't see the punch coming and he wasn't prepared to brace his body for any sort of impact. The punch landed, shutting his lights off before he hit the floor. The punch mechanics when slowed down are conventional, but it's the way Pereira stands beforehand. He doesn't look engaged like he's ready to throw with power. He's not in the athletic position. With him being so tall and upright, it's almost unthreatening. The key is that he consistently catches people by surprise. It's incredibly hard to pinpoint which punch Pereira is going to throw. When you look at his shoulders and hand placement, it's very hard to differentiate between a jab, a left hook, an uppercut, a body punch, and it also helps Pereira will vary up his targets. There is a video up on the MMA YouTube channel which talks about tunneling in baseball and compares it to how Pereira throws his punches. I highly recommend checking out that video for a deeper insight into this. The video emphasised that not only is the way Pereira punches difficult to read, but the stress of the repercussion factor on an opponent alters their reaction time. The more knockouts Pereira has added to his record, the more anxiety any future opponent will have when stood in front of him. After all, these aren't knockouts caused by an accumulation of damage where people are gradually worn down by pressure. Fighters make one mistake and wake up looking at the lights. When deciding whether to defend a jab or a left hook in that split second with the repercussions in mind, it is a very scary place to be. I would say the last contributing factor to the Pereira power is the sheer size of him. He is a big man with dense bones. Power is force multiplied by speed. The applied force times the speed of the moving body is power. The mass of the body is not included in the formula, but every moving body has mass. and Pereira has reported to weigh plus 230 pounds for a light heavyweight bout. That is a lot of weight on a very tall frame, which is around 6'4" and he possesses a 79-inch reach. That is a lot of leverage and weight behind a punch, especially when it's thrown with excellent technique. As much as training plays a huge part in an athlete's ability to produce force, there is a genetic factor. Some people are born with aptitudes towards certain things. I don't think Pereira, no matter how much he may have wanted and dreamed of as a child, would have been capable of being an elite jockey. Luckily for Pereira, he managed to find his sting. The fact he didn't turn pro until he was into his 20s and didn't train MMA seriously until into his 30s suggests he has a short learning curve when compared to most. We can't deny that the man is physically gifted as well as talented. I don't know how many people could replicate what Alex has done given the same set of circumstances or better. I think it's fair to say that many people who come to this channel want to learn how they can take something an elite fighter does and apply it into their own training. The obvious answer would be to punch with correct technique, get the reps in on the bag, the pads, shadowboxing and in sparring. Another obvious answer would be to find a coach that understands good punch mechanics to teach you, but there is a glass ceiling on that if you don't possess the elite genetics of a Pereira. So what can you, as maybe the average Joe, do to help? I'd say the main thing we can take away after studying Pereira is that he disguises his punches very well. Not only does he set up with positioning, feints and strike variety, but he has learned to make all his strikes look very similar. Most of his knockouts have come from an opponent thinking they are safe to go when they are not. They lose the exchange due to Alex's offbeat rhythm, and they engage him on a 50-50 both men head on, where Alex is set and ready and the opponent isn't. He catches them coming in, which doubles the impact. I'd say working on a staggered rhythm is going to be a very good place to start. Not always throwing combinations in a conventional sequence. For example, changing the tempo in a simple 1-2-3. A basic but effective drill. In those pauses, that could be the time when a man steps in or alters his defence to create the opening. I think another very important tool is video analysis. Everybody has a phone with a camera, so it's really not difficult to obtain footage of your training. It's more about knowing how to analyse it correctly in order to make the adjustments needed. The MMA video I talked about earlier, talking about tunnelling and Pereira's punching, also goes in depth about how sparring is arguably the most important piece of training, as it's the closest thing to replicating the fight, but it's also the most hazardous. Sparring review is a way to get the most bang for your buck out of the session. When analysing your own training, it's important to be objective. Look at yourself from the perspective of a coach and try not to have a bias. 3 things to look out for when reviewing tape. 1. Did my opponent defend my offence successfully? If so, why? Was it their position? Were they ready and prepared to defend? Were the strikes predictable? 2. If it landed clean, why? Were you able to off-balance your opponent first by forcing them to move into a position where they were less comfortable to defend? You could do this with, say, a feint or a setup strike like a jab. Did you use your footwork to create the attacking angle? Or were you just simply too fast in a 50-50? Another setup could be altering your rhythm to an offbeat and the opponent simply did not see the strike coming. 3. Were you defensively sound after landing? Were there negative repercussions to your attack because you either lacked technique or your opponent set you up? As always, thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment down below. You can also support the channel and access extra content over on the Pro Striking Patreon. Pro Striking appreciates you more than watching Alex Pereira left hook people into the shadow realm.